6.1 has finally given Kislev the rework that Shadows of Change never did, and it's changed everything. They have a whole new political system focused on maintaining the balance, devotion now rules their settlements, and attamans are back with a lot more impact. So this is how to play Kislev in 2025. Let's kick off with their racial mechanics, and first we have the brand new Ice Court and the Great Orthodoxy. And this is of course their new political system. Instead of being a race, it's more so a balance that you have to maintain over the course of your campaign. Each side progresses through tiers by collecting support, and this is mainly done via buildings and characters. Upon reaching a new tier, you'll earn a certain amount of boons, and these can then be spent on a large number of faction upgrades. There are 5 sections, and each one has 2 options with 2 tiers, which is a lot of numbers, but just look at it and it's a lot simpler than it sounds. The 5 sections are War, focused on upgrading your units, Hierarchy, focused on upgrading your lords and heroes, Dominion, focused on developing your lands, Legacy, focused on extracurricular army buffs like army abilities or campaign buffs, and Tenants, which is focused on the more magical aspects of the faction, both in campaign and battle. The exact upgrades vary depending on which side you pick, but they both obviously focus on their side of the conflict. So the Ice Court is all about the Ice Witches and Ice Guard, and the Orthodoxy is more about the Patriarchs and the everyday folk of Kislev. If you focus too much on either side of this, you'll start to incur penalties on your faction, starting with diplomatic penalties with the opposite faction, and escalating to severe penalties to research, devotion, construction cost, and army stats. The bottom line is you want to keep these two balanced, not only to avoid these penalties, but also to unlock boons on both sides of the conflict. They are all powerful for any faction, regardless of its focus, so build both up at a similar rate and try to maintain balance as much as possible. Devotion is replacing control, and for the most part it works exactly the same. You can increase it with buildings, army and character presence, and commandments. It's decreased through the usual suspects of corruption, enemy presence, and frequent conquest. At low levels, it reduces the line of sight of your settlements, but provides attamans with bonus experience to help you turn things around. At high levels, you not only get that vision increased, you are also immune to climate preferences, so can settle where you like as long as you keep this high. You can also perform several of the new invocations for your armies and settlements. Armies can choose from one of 4 invocations. Daz increases the experience gain and provides your army with flaming attacks, useful for speed leveling your army or taking on the undead. Salyak increases replenishment and battle healing, which is pretty obviously great for getting an army back to full health faster. Tor increases magical attack power and allows you to further increase power during battle, and this is a great option for generally making your army do more damage. And Ursun increases campaign movement range, increases the damage of bears, and provides an army ability to sap the will to fight from enemies, and this is obviously best used when you're making use of a lot of bear units. Settlements can use another 4 options, confusingly with these same 4 names, but different effects. Daz progresses construction a lot faster, so is great for building up settlements fast. Tor empowers defensive armies in the region and provides a powerful Cataclysm spell army ability, so is strong when enemies are invading. Salyak increases growth, healing, and recruitment capacity, which is fantastic for both growing provinces quickly alongside armies. And Ursun causes massive attrition to all hostile armies in your borders, so is another one useful for warding off invaders. Overall, it's not all that different to control, but the addition of invocations for a little added kick when you need it. Attamans are essentially the middle managers you put in control of every other province. This means for every 2 full provinces you control, you can assign 1 Ataman, and baseline, they each come with their own set of effects that will alter how the region performs. They can affect income, devotion, growth, and corruption, so just pick what you need where you need it most, and you can't really go wrong. Over time, these attamans will earn experience and be able to pick up skills like any other lord. These skill trees have some of the usual suspects you'd expect to find, like unit and stat buffs, but they also have some powerful, unique parts. The entire bottom row is totally new, with a focus on their regions to empower the effects attamans bring, and this is where you can really specialize these attamans and by extension your regions for a specific job. They can also choose to align with the Ice Court or Orthodoxy to add some extra support and bonuses for each side's heroes. Lastly, attamans also allow settlement garrisons in their region to sally out to attack enemies within range. This is very niche, but essentially it allows you to use garrisons to take out roaming enemy armies that refuse to attack a settlement and are just causing you a headache. It's probably not something you'll use super often, but it's a very cool feature that comes in very handy when you need it, and something I hope makes its way to a lot of other factions in some form. If you want my best advice for how to use attamans, build them up for a specific job. So say you build one up that is really good at growing settlements, reducing the cost of constructions, increasing growth, etc, etc. You then constantly move that around to regions that need to grow quickly, and then maybe have another ataman that's really good for recruitment, and then have that guy wherever you're recruiting units at the time. Just be sure to specialize them and move them around frequently to get the most possible benefit that you can. No use having a growth and construction ataman sat in a settlement that's at full size and will never build again. Lastly, we have the Ice Court Witches, and this is how the faction makes use of Frost Maidens and Ice Witches. Instead of recruiting them normally, you first have to train them up in the Ice Court. This takes 5 turns, and each turn you'll have to choose from one of 4 effects to place on them that tweak themselves alongside how they affect their army and surroundings. Once ready, you can recruit them from any settlement, and the only cost you pay is up front to start their training. It's best to have at least one Lord and Hero in stock for when you need them, so keep them trained up and ready at all times just in case. The last thing you want is rushing to put an army together, only to be waiting for training to finish for 5 turns. And lastly, we have their commandments. Purge the Steppes is useful for increasing devotion and slowing enemies in your lands. Awaken the Lands is useful for extra gold. Relief Columns is great when recruiting. And the Power of the Church is useful when recruiting heroes or trying to clean up plagues and corruption. Now we come to the 4 playable factions. First up, we have the Ice Court, led by Tsarina Katarin. Her faction is directly at odds with the Great Orthodoxy, so suffers from reduced relations all game long. However, she is allowed to have the Ice Court have 1 tier advantage over the Orthodoxy without suffering any consequences, so can focus on rushing those boons a little bit faster. Aside from this, she has a faster research rate and an increased Winds of Magic capacity for all armies. Ice Court training is a little cheaper, and all Frost Maidens are recruited with a few more levels. Her army generates a little bit of Ice Core support as long as she's on the map and cleanses corruption wherever she goes. All Ice Guard units in her army pay a little less upkeep, and she has a heavily reduced chance of miscasting her spells, so is much less risky to use when overcasting. Katarin is the quintessential Kislev campaign. You're the bulwark north of the Empire, and you've got to push chaos back to keep the world safe. Your main issue outside of this is managing the political climate of the region, and this will require lots of infrastructure buildings on both sides. Of course, she can lean more towards the Ice Court early, but it's extremely important to avoid those penalties, as beyond the relations, they start to make a real negative impact on your game. Aside from this, you want to focus on using as many spellcasters as you can, especially the Frost Maidens and Ice Witches. The extra Winds of Magic cap on all armies means you get a ton of spell value in your battles, and those extra levels will get your heroes making an impact very early. We have the Great Orthodoxy, led by Kostaltyn. He's the opposite side of the political conflict, so has the same effects as Katarin, only flipped. That means worse relations with the Ice Court and a higher threshold for Orthodoxy advantage before suffering penalties. He's much more focused on the common men and women of Kislev, so brings bonuses to their lower tier units and makes Patriarchs far tougher. He generates support for the Orthodoxy whilst he's on the map, and he almost always will be, with that improved wound recovery speed. Lastly, he grants the Rage passive to his entire army, allowing them to improve a number of their stats as they rack up kills in combat. Kostaltyn is very similar to Katarin in a lot of ways. They both have the same approximate starting location, though I would say his is a little bit harder with Throt and Azazel so close by. Where they differ is his preference for the Orthodoxy, giving you a little bit more leeway before those penalties come into effect. Just the same, avoid them as much as you can and maintain the balance to lead Kislev to a brighter future. Swap out the Ice Casters for Patriarchs, as they're now very tough frontlines buff machines, and make use of as many of those bread and butter units as you can early on to make the most of those stat bonuses. We have the Ursan Revivalists, led by Borris Ursus. To ease the pain of living in the Chaos Wastes, all settlements in that region gain a bonus to their devotion, hopefully allowing them to reach max tier and negate climate penalties a little bit faster. Alongside this, his settlements can be built up much faster, and all garrisons and religious buildings are a lot cheaper to help him set up and secure his location in no time. His close relationship with his daughter Katarin grants him increased relations with her faction, and lastly, as the bear guy, all Warbear riders in the faction gain increased training right out the gate. For his own army, any Warbear riders are also a little bit cheaper to maintain, and everything in his army gains bonuses when battling the various forces of chaos, and are immune to chaotic attrition to make their excursion a little more bearable. Honestly, the objective when playing as Borris is pretty much just to survive. The Chaos Wastes are a little more manageable thanks to his devotion bonus, but you still need to work to max it out to make settlement building actually possible without being instantly bankrupt. Obviously, you're rushing to get to the bears as soon as possible, so building up settlements faster and cheaper is an essential part of that plan. As for the political race, he can take a much more centrist approach to avoid penalties, so build up both equally and avoid making the campaign even harder than it already is. And lastly, we have the Daughters of the Forest, led by Mother Ostankya, aka Mama Stanky. She has 2 mechanics and they both run on Spirit Essence. This is earned mainly through post-battle loot, but can also be passively gained through very specific buildings, such as Ostankya's hut. The first of her mechanics is the Witch's Hut. From here she can combine various ingredients to create blessings and curses. Ingredients are unlocked either through alliances or battles with various factions, and each one has its own set of effects they bring to your creations. Once made, they appear in the pre-battle menu similar to ancillaries, and can be applied to your own or hostile units depending on the effects. These are one-time use, so you have to create them constantly if you want to make use of them every battle. Hexes are the second mechanic, and this is a set of 5 abilities listed at the top of the screen. She can remove all corruption from any region where she owns a settlement, heavily reduce the movement range and magical power of hostile armies, teleport any owned army to any magical forest, massively boost the income of a settlement, and summon a series of beast-filled armies in your own territory every other turn for 5 turns. and all 5 of these can then be upgraded with research. She can remove corruption and prevent any from increasing for a few turns, freeze that target's army in place, teleport any target's army on any faction to any magical forest, which is pretty funny, increase the income of the entire province, and increase the power of the summoned armies. To unlock each hex, you simply have to spend Spirit Essence, so spam them as much as possible both with hexes and the Witcher's Hut to unlock the more powerful options as early as you can. Alongside upgrading her hexes, she also has a small section of the tech tree just for her. It features upgrades to the more beastly units in the faction, alongside further bonuses for her mechanics. She can also choose from one of 2 Stein locations. At the start of turn 2, she can choose to stay in Bleakhold's fortress in the mountains of Nagrond, or return to Kislev in Plesk. If you choose to remain, you gain a bonus to the Witcher's Hut and some extra Spirit Essence. However, you'll also be unable to make use of the majority of Kislev buildings for recruitment alongside certain advanced infrastructure. If you leave, you gain some campaign bonuses for 10 turns and unlock the ability to build all regular Kislev buildings. Lastly, her other faction effects. She's perhaps the most powerful magic user in the faction and increases the magic capacity of all armies with every resource building she creates, adding up to a near bottomless pit if you reach the endgame. She also has a focus for the more beastly units in the roster, reducing the global recruitment time for the incarnate elemental of beasts, and buffs the defense of all spider units. Lastly, all armies under her banner amp up the aggression just a little bit when battling against anything that seeks to spread corruption. In battle, her magical power continues, with a bonus range being added to all spells, alongside the ability to drain enemy winds of magic reserve just by being close to them on the campaign map. All units in her army also gain magical attacks, so don't have to worry about any resistances, and lastly, all hag witches in her army also have a heavily reduced miscast chance, so overcasting is a lot safer of an option. Stanky's game really changes depending on where you choose to settle down. If you stay in Nagrond, it's pretty much the Dark Elf show. Whereas if you move to Kislev, first of all, you're protecting and cleansing the lands of Kislev, which is kind of her whole gimmick, so that's kind of nice. That said, it's very similar to Kostaltyn and Katarin, so if you're looking for something different, it might be worth braving the Dark Elves. Either way, you'll want to burn through Spirit Essence as fast as possible with hexes and incantations as much as you can. This is the only way to unlock those powerful hexes, and it will take you a very long time, so don't bother saving up, just keep burning them whenever you can. Mechanics aside, you also want to build as many resource buildings as you can to enhance the faction's magical power, and your army should focus on those beasts a lot more to make the most of her unique twist on the roster. And that's everything there is to know about Kislev's campaign in 2025. Let me know any questions you have in the comments below, and I'll do my best to help you out. Like, subscribe, and if you want more Warhammer 3 faction guides, then check out this video all about how to play Nurgle.